Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov Chess channel and welcome to a very special game that was played in the Computer Blitz Chess Championship in 2022. It's Stockfish 14 against Ethereal from the Super event, and this game is really special because it had so many so many tactical shots all over the board, and in one particular moment I really didn't even know what was going on. How is this even possible? So this is again simply brutal Stockfish stuff. Be prepared, as I would like to say. Put your seatbelts on and just enjoy this brutal and sick game by the fish. So here e4 was played by Stockfish. Ethereal's response was e6, the French defense, d4, d5. We have knight to c3, and after bishop to b4 we have the so-called Winawer Variation. So the idea is clear. We want to, here from black's perspective, simply mess up the pawn structure, b takes c3, and then go more positional into the game. But okay, the pre-arranged line was this: e5 had to be played so far. The organizers still pre-arranged this move e5. We have queen to d7. This was also pre-arranged move, but when we think about this position harder, we're analyzing, of course, a little bit theory, although it was a pre-arranged line. But I like to talk always a little bit about theory. Queen to d7 is actually a preparation to play maybe such an idea like b6 and then bishop to a6. We want to get rid of this light for bishop, which is temporarily blocked out by its own pawn structure here. But when that happens, if you play maybe something like b6 and bishop to b5, for instance, happens, maybe as a long-term plan, then c6 is still a possibility, and then you can cover yourself here with the pawn. But okay, here in the continuation we have a3, and again probably the best way here for black is to play bishop to c3, b takes c3. At least the pawn structure is messed up, and we're targeting now maybe even the weak c4 square. Maybe we are trying to get some kind of an outpost around the square c4 here from black's perspective. But okay, as I said, this was still not the pre-arranged line. The pre-arranged line was bishop to f8, and now knight to h3. We have a b6, we have a knight to f4, and now after knight to e7 we have now this idea bishop to b5. And okay, here c6, and that was now the last pre-arranged move by the organizer. And then the interesting fact about this game that was pre-arranged, it's actually a game, an old game between Mikhail Tal and Rafael Vaganyan from 1988, in which Mikhail Tal won the game. But here in this particular scenario, Mikhail Tal played also bishop to a4. But here comes the first difference between the Tal Vaganyan game and also this game between Stockfish and Ethereal. In the game, Vaganyan played here bishop to a6. He tried to stop here Mikhail Tal from castling, but in this particular game, here the Ethereal engine played the move b5. When you put now this move into an engine, it's the more accurate approach here of blacks, because here after move bishop to b3, now comes also a beautiful idea c5. c5 is beautiful because here if you take d takes c5, then of course knight to a6 is going to happen, and now the pawn is very weak here, and you see now this pawn structure here around the square d5 is really solid. So black in this particular scenario, I think, would solve all of the positional problems. So maybe white can hang on to this position with bishop to e3, but now with knight to f5, I kind of don't like here this position really of whites, that bishop will be taking, the pawn is weak on c5. So as I said, I think it's a good game here for black. So but after move c5 here, Stockfish didn't take, played simply knight to e2. And okay, here black could again play such moves like c4, but after bishop to a2 you could make maybe even progress. But I think in the near future we can play simply c3, bishop to b1, and you see now all of these pieces are suddenly coordinated towards the king side. So I'm not seeing a good way how black will defend this, because if black castles on the king side, it's, I think, suicide. If black castle queen side, it's suicide, I think, again, because you have advanced your pawns too much here. So in one particular moment we can break the position, maybe even sacrifice just some pawns in just to open the position if you castle, for instance, queen side. If you stay with the king in the center, it's also not so good. So here I don't like, I think, here black's position. So that's why here after move knight to e2, here the Ethereal engine didn't play c4, played simply d takes c5, pardon me, c takes d4. I flipped the board in my head, sorry. So after c takes d4, Stockfish took knight to d4, we have a knight to c6, and now knight takes b5. And okay, you could try maybe some ideas like knight to e5, but actually it's very risky. this wasn't played in the game, but after knight to e5 the game becomes really wild and tactical. Bishop to a4 is then the best continuation, and there are now really some sick tactics here on this long diagonal. You're pretty much forced even to give up, not to give up, to place your knight in front of the queen. And now after knight to d4, you see you have to get out of the range, and now with castling, whatever you do, for instance, if you play bishop to e7, then you get the stunner knight takes d5. This is brutal tactics after something like e takes d5 to get bishop to f4, and there is not a good way here to defend this position. You could try maybe some ideas like here bishop to d7 to cover yourself, but again the same stuff happens. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, bishop to f4, here rook to e1 will happen, so there's simply too much pressure here on the diagonal, and also here on d file. So here after knight to b5, this Ethereal engine played knight to f5, trying of course to liberate somewhere the dark bishop and secure the king by castling. So we have c3 by Stockfish, we have bishop to c5, knight to d3 attacking the bishop, bishop to e7, and now again this idea bishop to a4. This is very tricky because the king has to make now a decision. The problem always in these types of variation for black is this advanced pawn, which I think gives always here this beautiful space advantage for white, and suddenly black's pieces are not so well placed. And the most important thing, of course, one of the most important things in chess is to create spaces. And now with the move e5, you have to, I think, castle queenside is again not a possibility because the position on the queenside is simply too open. So that's why here this Ethereal engine played kingside castling. So we have knight to d4, we have knight takes d4, c takes d4, and now bishop to a6. Here we have bishop to e3, covering of course the d4 pawn, although this pawn cannot be taken immediately, but there are maybe some threats of queen to b7 getting out of the pin and also attack maybe the weak b2 pawn. So here queen to b7 was played, now finally castling by Stockfish. We have knight to a5, cementing here the position around the square c4, searching for this weak square in the position. We have rook to e1, and now rook to b8, attacking simply for the weakness on b2. Stockfish played now bishop to c2, we have bishop to d3, queen to d3, and now comes of course with checkmate threat on h7. If you take, of course, then queen takes h7, king to f8, and queen to h8 is checkmate. So that's why after queen to d3, first you have to cover yourself. Here g6 was played by Ethereal, and now b3. This is a good move because it gives here white temporarily time. Of course, if you play something like b4, then this knight gets cemented here on a beautiful square on c4, and suddenly there is not a good way to kick it away. Even if you try something like bishop to b3, at least what black can do is play knight takes e3, and we have now reached an opposite color bishops middle game / end game stage, sort of, in which I think black can hang on to this position and get the draw. So the engine gives here also, my engine at home gives here 0.0 evaluation. So here, as I said, after move g6 we have b3. The problem is about b3, you cannot take it because you get simply rook to b1, and your pin simply on the b file, you lose the piece. So here after b3 we have queen to b5. Ethereal is trying of course to simplify the game because look at this, the pieces are directed to the king, you have several weaknesses, and of course Stockfish is not interested to trade off the pieces, played simply queen to d1. We have rook to b7, we have a g3, preparing now h4 h5, at least to create further madness here on the king side, because that's the direction of the attack, because we have an advanced pawn on the e file, we have an advanced pawn on the king side, so that's why we should make progress just simply on the king side. So here rook from a to b8 was played, h4, we have knight takes b3, and now rook to b1. Okay, now white cannot take out the knight, and black can hang on to this position on the b file. But the most important thing is here to recognize that all of the pieces of blacks are simply moved to the queen side. Everything is aiming to the queen side, with actually nothing is happening happening. It's like you're invited on the party where no one is there. So here you see all of these pieces are simply too deflected from the king side. Now Stockfish is building really a monstrous attack here on the king side. Played simply queen to c after queen to c4. Stockfish makes simply further progress with the move h5. We have bishop to h3. Stockfish is saying you can also take out this pawn. If I would have here 5 pawns on this side, you can take them because the game is going on here on the king side. That was the most important thing here to recognize. After move h5, we have king to g2. Now Stockfish is trying to include this rook into the game. Really nice king maneuver. We have king to bishop to f8. We have rook to h1, a5, and now h takes g6. We have f takes g6, and now a beautiful tactical shot, really sick stuff. Rook takes h7. And in the beginning I thought that the king has to take when I analyzed the game at home, but actually the rook can take. And then I stopped and I was really curious what's going on. Why did Stockfish give up just the rook? Because now this is defendable. In my opinion, it seemed to me that it's defendable because of course after something like king to h7, then queen to h5 happens. That was my first thought of this tactic. I didn't even recognize in the beginning that the rook is covering the h7 square. Really sick stuff. But when I saw that's here Ethereal took, I asked myself the question, what's going on? What the why is this Stockfish engine playing the game like this? But actually what Stockfish has prepared here, it's really a sick brutal attack, because what we can notice now, first of all, there is this tension on the b file, and now Stockfish simply takes bishop to g6. We have here bishop to g7 by this other engine Ethereal. If you play here from black's perspective something like rook to g7, then it's not so good. The queen comes into the game, and you can maybe try to hang on to this position, including maybe this other rook into the game. But now with rook to h1, you see you're pretty much forced to sacrifice the rook because the bishop was covering that square, and now the main threat was queen to h8. So you're forced maybe to give up here the rook for the bishop. After queen to g6, you can cover yourself, but now with queen to e6, the game is simply over. So really too many tactical possibilities here for white. So that's why after move bishop to g6, here the Ethereal engine played simply bishop to g7. It's saying, okay, you can take out the rook, but at least I'm continuing the game with an extra piece. But Stockfish, of course, is not interested. Played queen to g4, attacking further the e6 pawn. We have queen to c6, and now bishop to g5. Now the bishop comes very active into the game. Again, I'm pointing out, although here the rook is on the b file, the knight is on the b file, these two pieces are simply too far away from the action. It's actually like Stockfish has an extra piece here on the board, because this Ethereal engine is only defending with 2 pieces in front of the king, and Stockfish is attacking with 4 pieces. So it's a huge difference. So rook to b7, again the Ethereal engine is trying to get new defensive pieces into the game. We have bishop to h7, finally Stockfish takes, king to h7, and now bishop to f6. If you take bishop to f6, then it's game over. E takes f6, and there is not a good way to defend anymore this potential rook to h1. You see the queen is cutting off the g file, you cannot escape, and it would be a checkmate. So after move bishop to f6, we have knight to d4 here by Ethereal, and now queen to h4. This is the only move that Stockfish can make. Every other move is actually bad. After rook to h1, the king can actually escape, and that's the most important thing. Probably the game would end in a draw. After bishop to g7, rook to g7, queen takes d4, and probably, as I said, this game should end in a draw, because okay, black has this powerful supported pawn on the d file, it has also this one, but the king is a little bit naked, and I think that white can also always create some perpetuals. But after move knight to d4, here the Stockfish engine played the correct move, queen to h4, first forcing here the king to retreat to the g8 or to cover. If you play king to g8, then bishop to g7 happens. That's now the tactical shot. If you take here rook to b1, if you take out the rook here on the b file, then you get simply queen to h8, you get checked, and now again threatening some discoveries. Maybe you can include the queen into the game, but now bishop to f6, here a new check, we have now it's checkmate threat on g4, so you have to maybe include the queen into the game g4. Really wild stuff. So after king to h4, queen to h8 for instance can happen, you can cover, but it's checkmate. So you're getting into a mating net. It's really hard to escape from this tactic. So as I said, this would be the possible continuation after king to g8, but here in this particular scenario the Ethereal engine played bishop to h6. Stockfish simply played now queen to d4. We have bishop to g7. If you play now here rook to b1, then you get queen to d3, and you have to cover now. And now after queen to g6, you see again it's a checkmate. It's not the point that we want to take out the rook. The problem is again this beautiful activity of the queen and the bishop. So after move queen to d4, as we said, we have bishop to g7, we have queen to d3, king to g8, and now again a beautiful move, queen to g6, because if you take, then you get checkmated here on g7. So it's really like a dance that Stockfish is doing here. So all of the pieces are playing in such a beautiful harmony. Every time Stockfish grabs the piece, grabs a pawn, creates a check, black cannot escape. It's really like a beautiful dancing machine. So here in the continuation we have d4 by Ethereal, we have king to h3, we have queen to f3, and now here finally Stockfish took. We have queen to f7. Of course you cannot take here because we get rook to b8, and it's checkmate if you don't cover. Of course if you play queen to f8, then first we check, and now this is completely winning. So here after move bishop to g7, we have queen to f7. Here Stockfish takes, rook to f7, and now bishop to f6. We have a4, rook to a1. Stockfish is now protecting this very dangerous two pawns on the a file and the d file. We have a rook to a7, rook to a3, we have king to f8, and now the king is of course going towards the pawns. But now with bishop to g5 everything is protectable. Here in the continuation we have a rook to a4, a rook to a5, bishop to d2, we have rook takes e5. Here Stockfish simply takes, rook to a4, rook to d5, and now Stockfish simply took the pawn, and from this point on it was of course game over. So although the game was prearranged, I'm not going to now push some further moves because it's completely winning. Here Stockfish has an extra pawn, has an extra piece, and here will in the move, let me see, 55, the game was prolonged till move 70, in which Stockfish created a checkmate. So okay, really wild stuff. Again, a beautiful sick game played by the fish. I really enjoyed it, especially because of this tactical shot on h7. This was really a stunner for me when I watched the game at home. I was really surprised what is going on, how is this possible. Really again some beautiful tactics. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more Stockfish Lila C0 dragging attacks like this, check out my commented chess games played by computer series. And if you like to see maybe what's going on now in the Tata Steel Masters, check out my also covered so far. Here are some games that we have analyzed before. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.